The problem with TikTok in the United States is that our freedom is being used against us.
Yeah.
Our openness is being used against our very own people, particularly if we just look at this from the micro level, teenagers and teenage girls in particular. On that issue alone, that just very convincing research alone, we should hate this app. It's not out of an opposition to social media, although we ought to be careful about that too.
Yeah, it's funny when people respond to you and say, "Oh, sure, you're against TikTok, but what's next? Facebook?" And it's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll get to that next." But can we start with the one owned by the Chi-Coms? Let's at least start with the ones owned by the Chinese communists. Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show. I'm Larry O'Connor, and today we're talking about something that millions and millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of Americans use every single day. You're using it right now, social media. But we're specifically talking about TikTok, that Chinese-owned platform that goes well beyond just trendy dances and recipes and other strangeness. No, TikTok is actually a device that was created by the Communist Party in China to shape how Americans, especially younger Americans, think about their culture, their politics, even their own identity. This is incredibly serious and incredibly dangerous. And we're going to get right to the heart of it with Dr. Kevin Roberts. After all, it's the Kevin Roberts Show. Dr. Roberts, thank you for this very important issue.
Larry, thanks for letting me join you on my show.
As usual, I did a deep dive on the Heritage website, Daily Signal. You guys have been on top of this almost from the get-go, I want to say. Tell me what makes TikTok different than any other social media platform.
Well, because the Chinese Communist Party owns the algorithm, the back office back-end formula for what you see, the content that's published, what is promoted to you over and over and over. That alone should concern us, because the Chinese Communist Party, as we've said at Heritage for a long time now, is not just an adversary, and it's not just the greatest adversary to the United States right now. We believe it's the greatest adversary in the history of the United States. But the second reason is the Chinese Communist Party, with all of their wisdom, block all of the content that undermines our understanding in the United States of, what is a woman, what is a boy, what are proper relationships. They block all of that really questionable content from their own populace, which tells you right away they know what they're up to. And the third thing, and this is sort of the fuddy-duddy, almost Luddite position that I take on these questions, is Americans use it too much. We need to be spending more time doing more productive things. But actually, that would be using some other social media platforms that don't have these characteristics that TikTok does.
I read from one of the experts at Heritage, and this was, I think, in 2023, that TikTok is actually a vehicle of foreign influence. And I don't think people quite understand. Can you do a bit of a deep dive on that and explain how many parents who see this thing as just sort of a toy that their kids are doing and dancing on and sending messages, how is that foreign influence on their minds?
Yeah, let me just say, to acknowledge what would be, I think, a valid common sense position that Americans have, parents, that they think this is just another social media platform. You would have every reason to think that. So it's not that someone's dumb or ill-intentioned or anything like that. We're not making accusations at Heritage about parents making good decisions. What we're saying is that actually underscores how deeply nefarious this is. And my colleagues are right. TikTok is a complete system of foreign influence. It is because the Chinese Communist Party directs, we believe, according to our research and that of others, propaganda being sent not just to Americans generally, but to American kids. And so there are a couple of aspects of that are really problematic before I get to the real problem, the even bigger problem. The first is the vast majority of daily users of TikTok are American teenage girls. The content that is being sent to them is extraordinarily damaging. We live at a time when teenage suicide rates, particularly among young women, are increasing. I'm not suggesting that TikTok is the exclusive reason for that, but it is one of the factors that goes into that. All of that questionable content is blocked in China itself. The second thing is, we know that TikTok is being used by the Chinese Communist Party to influence elections. That is through the use of propaganda. Very clear foreign influence operation like what we saw the Soviets do during the Cold War. But it's even easier now because the Chinese don't even have to pay to get access to Americans themselves. But the third thing, which affects everyone, you can say be a middle-aged man who's on TikTok, and therefore all of the claims we made about teenage girls are not relevant to you, I hope. But the third thing is the violation of private data is extraordinary. This is the problem with the Chinese Communist Party owning the algorithm. And it's one of the reasons that my colleagues at Heritage have attempted to be sort of the accountability partners, if you will, of federal policymakers, both at the legislative and executive levels.
Yeah, let's really pour into that part of it, because I think everybody sort of understands, whether they agree or want to do something about it. They understand the damage that's coming on the input side when we or our children are receiving the bizarre information and culturally undermining messages that are coming into TikTok. But that output, what they're getting from us, what they're holding from us, ByteDance is the company that owns TikTok, right? They are a Chinese company. My understanding is that it is illegal for a Chinese company to do business internationally, and certainly in America, unless you are working with the government in Beijing. And that means an intelligence operation. We know this. They're gathering. Do we even have an idea of what kind of information they're gathering willingly from Americans giving it to them? And it goes right to their intelligence agencies.
We do. It's not only anything and everything that you put into your profile at TikTok that's part of the, your viewing history. It's potentially, some would even argue likely, anything that is on the device on which the TikTok app resides. Our former Heritage colleague, who's now in a senior level position in the administration on tech policy, Kara Frederick, was the first person to tell me, I think in my first week or two at Heritage in late 2021, where I already had sort of the natural default against this nonsense, where she actually brought some expertise and knowledge to it. She said, Kevin, you just have to assume that anything that was ever on your phone, not just on the TikTok app, is now possessed by the Chinese Communist Party. Think about that store of data and just think about, God forbid, that there be a war with China and that we lose that war with China, the data that the Chinese would have in that post-war situation. This is not nonsensical to be talking about this. In a subsequent episode we'll be releasing next week or so, we'll be talking about the military threat. It's connected to this.
All right, so I hear people defending TikTok or sort of equivocating here and just sort of, cynically saying, please, Google's already got all that, Meta's already got all that, Amazon's already got that. I mean, they're already capturing all that information about you and all that data. What's the difference if ByteDance and China are doing?
Well, I think it's a problem that they have all that data too. so I readily concede.
That'll be an episode 10 weeks from now. We'll get to that one.
Yeah. Our friends or non-friends at Google love it when I go on my annual Google screed. But don't use those products. What makes it even worse is that this is owned by the Chinese. And, if the Chinese were allies like the Israelis or the British, I mean, that would still be problematic. But it's a real problem because they're such adversaries.
All right, let's get to the history of it here. I mean, obviously, smartphones and social media, and I mean, TikTok, it's only 6 years old, I think, or something, or maybe 8 years old. But this isn't a new problem. If you go back to the Cold War or go back to World War II, maybe it was a different platform, maybe it wasn't social media, but our adversaries have always been trying to gather information, and it's pretty historically sound for the American government, the military, to be very protective of that because they know the vulnerabilities, don't they? What has happened in the past to these things? Television, radio broadcast, et cetera.
Yeah, through television and radio in particular, in the past, the United States government was caught flat-footed. In particular, the Soviets had lapped us early on in the Cold War when it came to the usage of propaganda. In fact, we believe that the Soviets were able to improve their own propaganda machine because they studied so closely the propaganda machine of Nazi Germany. And then they used that against Americans. With Americans, of course, given our quality of life, given the innovation, technological innovation that exists here, having a lot of access to a lot of televisions and radio early in those industries, the Soviets used that to their advantage by infiltrating Americans' homes. with the radio waves in particular. And so the United States took two actions, not only to close off that access, but secondly, to go on offense, if you will, and see a real expansion of Voice of America radio. That became controversial under the Obama and Biden years. But as we said at Heritage, and say to this day, that was vital when it came to offsetting the propaganda machine of the Soviets. This is just another playbook another play from the same playbook. It's just so much more technologically advanced. But also that, Lisa, just real quick, Larry, if I may.
Yeah. Please.
This is technology that Americans developed that the Chinese likely stole to use against us once again. And so President Trump's very frequent complaint about intellectual property theft is always over the target in this case.
Yeah, I want to get to the president a little bit later because he's had a couple of different messages that I'm confused about with TikTok. Let's get to that in a second. But while we're sticking with history, you look back and you see, Tokyo Rose during World War II. And as you mentioned, Voice of America and some of the just really heavy-handed propaganda that the Russians were sending our way and that we sent back. It's kind of laughable when you look at it now, how obvious and blatant it was. This is why TikTok is so scary and it's so insidious because it's so subtle. In fact, the way they're trying to influence Americans and especially children is more of an emotional thing and an undermining of our cultural norms. You don't even see it coming the way they're doing.
No, it's true. They're able to bypass all of the typical obstacles, checks that would exist against any foreign government, being able to access our own people with propaganda. And that's the nature of anything on a device that you can hold in your hand. And so I think it's really important for Americans to understand that Heritage's opposition to TikTok, we don't use it. We're opposed to it even existing in the United States. And until and unless an American company owns that algorithm, and that has not happened yet, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment, it's not out of an opposition to social media, although we ought to be careful about that too. My Heritage colleagues, I think, have been eloquent about arguing for a more balanced usage of that. So let's just say that people generally accept Heritage's constructive critique of our tendency to overuse social media, almost all of us. Put on top of that these concerns with TikTok, and you ought to go delete it right now. Delete it right now.
Yeah, it's funny when people respond to you and say, "Oh, sure, you're against TikTok. Well, what's next? Facebook?" And it's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll get to that next." But can we start with the one owned by the Chi-Coms? Let's at least start with the ones owned by the Chinese communists. Are there any historical examples of a country who was not on guard? That didn't actually sort of protect their citizens or protect their culture from these kind of foreign influence operations?
If there is, I can't think of one. I mean, maybe if you go back, I'm just trying to be fair and accurate. Maybe you could go back to ancient times when one of the Greek city-states wasn't aware that there was
that Trojan horse was that was an influence operation.
We found
but
one.
Also, let me put it this way. We've been successful in undermining governments overseas during the Cold War and sort of undermining faith in various dictators that were unfriendly to us. That's how we know this is what it is, because we've used this sort of technology and this sort of thing effectively for the cause of our own interests.
No, that's right. And no doubt some of those cases were good and legitimate, and no doubt some of them were the opposite. I think about what probably is going on in Iran right now, which is, I suspect our CIA is active, but let's just say that the opening up of Iran, or the attempt to open up Iran to not just TikTok, but to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all is an attempt by the United States to get more information access to the people. Generally speaking, if you're able to do that in a totalitarian state, the dam has broken. The problem with TikTok in the United States is that it's the opposite. Our freedom is being used against us. Our openness is being used against our very own people, particularly if we just look at this from the micro level. Teenagers and teenage girls in particular, on that issue alone, that just very convincing research alone, we should hate this app.
I think you just mentioned it, but if you could expand on it, but you said that you've already sort of been against just social media in general. But what was the point when you sort of figured out and the light bulb went off that TikTok just rises above or below, actually, all these other platforms? That TikTok is, as you put it, a civilizational issue here.
Yeah, I'll definitely answer that question, but you might enjoy, you might not, but you're going to get it anyway. A little bit of a personal story about technology. When I became president of Wyoming Catholic College in 2013, I showed up there and I knew this about the college, but it was very different living it. That's a place where, starting with its inception 20, 25 years ago, students are expected, they're required to turn in their cell phones at the beginning of the semester. And so
Wow.
when you're teaching them, when you're sitting in the dining hall, when you see them walking in the beautiful town of Lander, Wyoming, from one school building to another as a sort of a college campus within the downtown, you see no phones. And instead, what you see is eye to eye contact. Instead, what you experience are conversations that are rich and deep and real and authentic, and you actually see the people. And I was the one who was the most common violator of this because I'm thinking, I got to check my phone and see if that donor called back. I got to see what this faculty member wants. And it was the students who regularly said, Dr. Roberts, you can have the phone, but you shouldn't have it out, in a dining hall. So fast forward to late 2021 when I get to Heritage, and we had already been working on this at Texas Public Policy Foundation where I was, but Heritage was light years ahead of us because of the expertise they had in Kara Frederick and others. And it was Kara who briefed me again in my first week or two and explained to me how terrible Facebook was. Because remember, we're coming on the heels of the 2020 election and the interference that Facebook was guilty of. She said, oh, but Kevin, that's not even the worst of it. Let me tell you about TikTok. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Our kids don't get cell phones until they're driving, and which means, pretty late in their teenage years. And so I wasn't worried about them having TikTok on their phones, but I was worried about whether they were accessing it online. And so I would just say, yes, policy is important here, but we as individuals have a real obligation, obviously a moral obligation as parents, but even a moral obligation to all other Americans to help be our brothers and sisters keepers against something that's truly evil for our society and also for our kids.
So you're going to hear a lot of people again. And listen. I don't mean to downplay their emphasis on freedom and choice and the ability to express oneself and consume whatever they want. They'll say, "Listen, Kevin, I know you know best, but I've got a brain of my own. I can resist. I can tell when I'm being influenced and manipulated. Let me be, and just don't get out there and start banning things like some school marm. Respect me and respect my ability to discern what's real and what isn't."
I accept that argument for social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter that are not owned, in essence, by the Chinese Communist Party. But the second
Yeah,
thing I
that's the
would
key
say
difference.
is all of us could still do a better job of spending less time online. And so I will stick to that, knowing that that's just part of my job. I spend time online. We obviously distribute this show and all of the Heritage podcasts that way. We get it. It's not that we're dismissive to or even argue against that really good position that you made. It's just that TikTok is in a category of its own.
Yeah. A quick America 250 angle. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson wasn't busy on his Facebook page while he was writing the Declaration. Thomas Paine was kind of a blogger in his own way, but I don't want to delve too deep into that. They didn't have to deal with this, but they did have to deal with foreign influence. They did have to deal with other countries trying to get in and manipulate which way we're going, especially after our founding, right?
Sure, just ask John Adams regarding the Alien and Sedition Acts and the belief, and there is a little bit of evidence, at least a little bit of evidence to suggest this was true, that the French had infiltrated some American newspapers. Now, the usage of that, sorry to go on a history screed, against Thomas
That's why I
Jefferson
asked. It's
and the
okay.
election of 1796 and 1800 was probably pretty abusive. But the point is, this has always been an issue. But that, for us at Heritage, Larry, underscores why we think our government, needs to take care of this problem.
So, can you tell me right now what the administration's position is on TikTok? Because I can't. I know that they were looking for a buyer. They were looking to wrest it from China. They were ready to ban it. Congress passed a bill demanding that it be banned. But the last I saw, it looked like there may be a new American owner, but that key algorithm was still going to be able to be owned by the Chinese. What's going on there?
Yeah, the key part on any current or future deal is who owns the algorithm. And anything that stops short of what the federal law requires, which is that an American company own it, is going to be unsatisfactory. I think that the administration has, to their credit, has been trying to thread the needle in saving what they think are the best aspects of TikTok, not the least of which is, from their vantage point, having used it successfully in the 2024 election to generate turnout among younger voters. And we certainly get that. They're trying to balance that against these other concerns. But for us at Heritage, even though we're grateful that right-minded conservative policy leaders have been able to use TikTok for good political purposes, that is victories, we do not believe even that offsets the concern that exists for all Americans if that algorithm continues to be owned and manipulated by the CCP.
Yeah, I mean, I try to shorthand it here, and every time I see a potential new deal on TikTok and what the resolution is going to be, as far as I'm concerned, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but if our friends in Beijing, who are not our friends, if they're satisfied with the deal, then it's not a good deal.
That's a pretty good sign that it's a bad deal. So
Yeah.
hats off to my colleagues who are very supportive of the worldview and other policy achievements of the Trump administration for approaching this as friends from the outside. Sometimes your friends from the outside are going to remind you what needs to be done. And we're not going to stop working for that ultimate aim, which is to make sure that an American owns that algorithm, not the CCP.
All right, y'all, go to the Heritage Foundation website, search on TikTok. Same with Daily Signal. You'll see some great write-ups about this. Educate yourself so you know all the facts about what you're dealing with here, and I think you'll reach the same conclusion that we've reached. TikTok, what's the word I'm looking for, is garbage, and it should burn in a dumpster fire. There. That's a good way to put it, I think. The fact of the matter is we're not technophobes here or anything. This is about understanding who shapes our children's vision and who influences how our kids think and feel about the world around them. And if that's not a priority for you, well, we've got much more to discuss. And that's why you need to keep watching The Kevin Roberts Show. Next week, we're going to talk about the threat of the Chinese military and how they're encroaching on America's very sovereignty. We'll see you then. It's The Kevin Roberts Show.